Let's cross there and hear what's coming forth from LICO Regency.
Certain standard lessons from each of them. And they've got a certain profile, which I'll be mentioning in a few minutes. Then the third part looks at the mechanics of capture. How is capture organized in practice? And then finally, the last part talks about undoing capture. The general tone of the report is not very optimistic, as you will see as I speak. Not because I don't think anything can be done, but I think the realistic options available are actually very limited. But we'll talk about that either now or in Q&A. Let us begin by setting the scene. If you look back for the last 15 months, we've had very frantic, we are in one of those phases of having come out of our cryogenic freeze, where there have been very frantic reforms, of very frantic action over the last 15 months. We have a new AG, we have a new DPP, which means that we have had a makeover of the State Law Office. The State Law Office under the previous Attorney General operated like the legal wing of State House. Now, the theory was that by making over the State Law Office, you could give impetus to anti-corruption reform. But the makeover of the State Law Office also came together with a handshake. And the handshake had a very important dimension to corruption in Kenya, because it restored the political legitimacy that the president was facing, having had an election nullified and having won an election that had a very low voter turnout, basically illegitimate. So that people then argued that now the president did have political gremlins to worry about, and he had a new law office, State Law Office. He should be able to fight corruption. And he would be able to fight corruption because, one, he was concerned about his legacy, and two, the economy could no longer be his legacy, because the economy, all the measures he had taken to try and deal with the economy had not really worked. And the initial measures were impressive. I remember being accosted by people who told me, you critics, because there are people out there who just dab everybody in this paint puzzle, in this brush, you critics. Now you see, the president has initiated a new wave of prosecutions, and he's even arrested some big fish. He has initiated a get our money back. We've written to 7 countries, Australia, I mean, the countries were named. We have even impressed donors. I think UNECA called President Kenyatta an African champion. The State Law Office was reinvigorated. The multi-agency task force on corruption was reinvigorated. And 1,000 procurement officers were sent home to be revetted and reappraised, including through lie detector tests. I would have been very keen to design the questions for the lie detection tests. Now, yet, with all this activity, there is a certain freeze again. And people have this sense that corruption isn't being fought. So, what is going on? The first thing to note is that the current approach has been largely tactical. It's too legalistic, it's too prosecution-driven, it's too activity-driven. So there are a series of unconnected activities in which corruption is being fought. And then it's been instrumentalized. It's been instrumentalized so that it's become not a weapon for fighting Kenya's governance crisis, but a weapon for resolving Jubilee's internal problems, internal political problems. And it has become, it's a certain serendipity, there's a certain serendipity in this, because one faction thought, having control of state power, it would be able to use it to get rid of their enemies. But in fact, the other faction has also learned that if you expose what you know about what is going on, you have a mutually assured destruction, which is exactly what is going on. Now, all the measures now being implemented are a carbon copy of the measures that Kibaki implemented in 2003, 2004. Those measures failed then, and they are going to fail now for those who are not already failed. I remember thinking to myself, why 1,000 procurement officers? Kibaki sent home 1,000 procurement officers. Uhuru sent home 1,000 procurement officers. What is magical about 1,000? Then I thought to myself, maybe these guys, the advisors, maybe they've been reading, you know, those books, Haditha Fulela Ulela, 1,001 Nights. maybe they've been reading these. Let's just cut this to 1,000. It's a nice round number. Because there is no explanation why they should be sending 1,000, not more than 1,000. Now, why do these reform efforts keep failing? They fail because they do not address the real problem. The real problem is the union of corruption and politics. What you have is a cabal of insiders who capture the state, and principally, not all of the state, principally the presidency, treasury, and the security. Because that's all you need to capture a state. Capture power, capture money, and capture intelligence. If you capture those three permanently, you've basically captured the state. The modern state is actually a very easy thing to capture if you think about it. So that what then happens is the government and the state machinery becomes a temporary zone for personalized appropriation. And politics becomes a competitively aggressive process of trying to get into that zone for appropriation. That's what politics is. Okay? Now, why is the state repurposed this way? The state is repurposed this way, first, so that you can gut government resources, and then you can use some of the gutted resources for electioneering and maintenance of power, and then politics in this context is a zero-sum game, completely zero-sum game. And the state is a victim. And if you think about how we play politics, it is then a competition to see who can be ever faster in the process of enrichment. That's what the state has become. Now, for capture to work, 4 things need to happen. 1, oversight institutions must be eviscerated and hobbled. That is the Office of Controller, the Office of Controller of Budget, the Office of Auditor General, the Commission on Human Rights, parliamentary committees. This must be weakened and eviscerated. Capture is not going to work if any of them is functioning. Law enforcement and rule of law institutions, the police, the judiciary, the prosecution, they must be weakened, captured, or redirected as weapons. As a matter of policy. Ordinary channels of countervailing the power of the state, enforcing accountability, must be weakened too. So civil society, institutions, media, there must be a